show. As always, I'm your host, Alan O'Donoghue, and I am joined by my partner in crime, Dr. Andrew Vincent. Dr. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm a hamster owner now, which people listening can probably hear from my voice. But my 5-year-old son got a Chinese dwarf hamster for Christmas, so we're all doing great. And you got a Chinese dwarf hamster living in your house. Liverpool's winning a bunch of games. All is good with the world. How are things for you, Al?
Life is good with me, Andrew. I've just had a very relaxing Christmas. It's been lovely. I got a brand new signed Jurgen Klopp hat from my
Wow,
brother as a present. Yeah, very kind of him.
almost as good as a hamster, Al.
No, 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 no. You're on a whole different level to me. Before we went live, we were talking about my experience of guinea pig ownership, the most pointless creatures. So Andrew's about to understand that hamsters maybe are a little bit more interesting than guinea pigs, maybe not, but it's going
We'll
to be a
have,
fun ride.
we'll see what kind of listener interest there is. Maybe we'll have to start a podcast on small rodent ownership.
Yeah, I'm not doing that one.
I could fill 40 minutes. I've only had the hamster for a week.
I'm sure you can. That's just a sleep deprivation. But anyway, Andrew, we are here to talk about Liverpool Football Club. And it's been a while since we chatted, and they've been winning.
They have.
I think the last time we spoke, they'd gone through their sticky patch of two draws in a row or something like that. I think. Um, if that turns out to be our sticky patch for the season, I'll take that all the way. But it's been a very enjoyable festive period as a Liverpool fan from a on the pitch perspective. Have you enjoyed it over there?
Yes, very much so. It's a really fun team to watch. He's just got a lot of players who are really, really doing their things well and like coming into their own. And I think it's like Jones sticks out to me. Of course, Mo Salah sticks out to me. Diaz as a nine who kind of wanders around. Like he had the goal, I think it was in the West Ham game, that just felt very Suarez-y, where
Mm,
it was like he was being really direct and the ball kind of took a bounce and ended up in this really good spot and he buried it. And it felt just like that Suarez-y kind of directness. Cody Gakpo is like he has Cody Gakpo things. Whereas like
yeah,
last year, I think probably around this time, the question would have been like, I don't see what's his thing. What does he do? Like there's a lack of um clarity around his game, I think, and what made him tick. And I think now that he's in a more settled spot where he's done well in the past, and it's like, his thing is really to cut in off the left and crank rifled shots in to the top corner. But or I mean, he had that. It didn't get finished, but that through ball to Salah that like cut
mm,
through like was just. Whew. So it's like you just have a lot of people playing their game and playing really well. And what's more fun to watch than that? I mean, like watching people at their best, like really nail the things that they do well. That's as good as it gets. And our man Arne Slot, who's just a tactical wizard.
yeah, he is. I think that's been the big standout for me has been the tactical flexibility that he shows, but the ability to observe the opposition in the first half and then be able to get the players to change tactically to counteract what the opposition are doing with pretty much no training time. It's absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I'd love to know more about the kinds of instructions he gives because they
Mm,
must be very simple. Like in order to make a halftime impact. And it's interesting because I feel like you hear from different managers in different times, and um, I feel like the prevalent message that I've heard in the past is maybe some managers who have felt like the impact you can really make at halftime is kind of limited. You can make some adjustments and make some changes, but like during the game, there's not a lot you can do. Whereas, I had heard him say like the biggest it was when he was suspended. He
mm.
said, "Oh, I didn't realize I get to be in the locker room at halftime still." And he was basically like, "Whatever, like I'll sit in the stands." Like I fine. I'll see better, and then I could still go in at halftime and say what I want to say. It was almost like he was like, "This is," and that game was so miserable outside too. It was like he probably
Yeah,
would have taken that arrangement ahead of time if you had given it to him.
yeah.
Um,
His his
yeah,
his flexibility is just amazing. Like you say, the instruction must be very simple, but it must be concise enough to allow the players to understand and then execute, and for
mhm.
everyone to know what their job is within reason. And they still look like there's levels they can go.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you were saying before the pod that you really like Arnie a lot. What is it? Is it mostly the flexibility, or is
Mm.
it him as a person too? Like, what is it that's got you?
It's it is that flexibility that he doesn't he's able to analyze. Sorry, it appears like he's able to analyze the game as an analyst and make tactical changes that, for the most part, result in a positive outcome on the pitch. And like that is just that's gold dust, absolute gold dust. You don't see it. I do like the way he carries himself. I like the way he's quite blunt with a smile on his face, so he probably kind of gets away with it a bit more than maybe Klopp, and maybe it's just a new thing. But yeah, I he's he's showing a tactical masterclass so far. And I suppose we all keep waiting for the downturn or the really challenging period. And it just hasn't happened yet.
No.
And I actually think we're getting better. Like that's the other
Yeah.
thing. And that's not to say that we won't go on a bit of a run where we maybe draw or lose a couple of matches. That's normal. But I think, yeah, I really like the cut of his jib. I like how he holds himself.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And I think one of the things that maybe at times was frustrating about Jurgen was it felt like his I mean, part of what made him great was his ability to trust plan A,
Mm,
and really drill plan A and create that as this instinct and habit and stick with it. And, sometimes though when that didn't feel like it was working for him, like the kind of changes he would make or not make, or how late he would leave it to make subs or do something different, just as someone watching, it could be frustrating to be like, do something different. Like um, and so it's a nice change to know that like he's thinking he's probably already a step ahead. He's making changes, like even in the first half, if he's seeing things,
mm,
small instructions. Excuse me. Yeah, so I think that's really cool. And I think when you take someone that tactically dialed in and you give them, well, this is going to be a really nice tie-in to one of the things we've got coming up, Al. But it's like obviously it's not how chess works because everyone gets to use the same pieces.
mm.
But it's like tactically, like if you take someone who's this dialed in and you give them pieces this effective to move around the board, that changes things a lot, right?
Yeah.
Because you're talking about someone who's maybe always been tactically really dialed in, but it's like now you get to tweak the roles and positions and tell these players who are unbelievably talented and maybe have a greater capacity to do more. Um, and what that probably opens up for him is really significant. So I'll bet you he's having some fun too.
Yeah, he
Seems
looks.
like.
Yeah, he looks like he's having fun. And I did read an article, and I think it was from a Dutch, I don't know, newspaper or magazine or something, a few days ago, and they were talking about, the transition from Feyenoord, and like I think his family have stayed in the Netherlands because his kids are young and they didn't want to take them out of school and stuff like that, and they were coming over for Christmas, which he was looking forward to. Um, but I wonder, having that, not having his family maybe at the start has maybe helped. Well, I'm sure it's not easy being away from your family, but he probably is spending a lot of time analyzing his team, the opposition teams, and stuff like that. But I think what they were kind of saying was, or he was saying, was essentially that, you know, I I am tactically very flexible. I am very much aware of what's going on, and it's so fun to be able to work with these players, with the footballing, what was the word he used, intelligence that they have, probably makes his job that little bit easier too, and then the quality that they have as well. Like it must be, when you level up in a game and you're like, oh my god, now I get to be Mo Salah in FIFA or whatever it might be, and all of a sudden we're banging in goals left, right, and center. So it's been a very enjoyable first half of the season, and like I think the other thing is, normally, and this is where maybe City and Liverpool have skewed football or the Premier League over the last few years. The seasons that Arsenal, Chelsea, I suppose less so City are having, in my mind, is a regular champion winning team
Mhm.
season. They're dropping points, they're losing games, they're drawing games, but they're still winning a lot more. We're actually in the middle of an exceptional season. This doesn't happen. You don't just lose one game and what, draw two? Is that it in the league? I think maybe three.
I think it's 3,
Yeah,
but,
three. Yeah, Arsenal, Newcastle, and Fulham. Yeah, that
I
just
was
doesn't happen.
listening to the Daily Red. I was listening to it yesterday. I don't know what day the actual recording was from, but Dave was talking through how many points is it, or like what kind of season would people have to have in order to have 90 points or 94 points or something like that. And it just makes you realize how ridiculous those seasons where we were at like 99 and still lost were.
Mm.
Like just the level of consistency and form. Like to have 3 draws and 1 loss and not be on pace for the best Jurgen Klopp seasons,
Yeah,
that's unbelievable. It's completely ridiculous.
yeah.
Um, but there's nothing, absolutely nothing you can complain about with this season this year.
Not
Not
so
on the
far.
pitch, at least.
Yeah,
There's
yeah, not
some,
so
you
far.
know, there's some lingering contracts, which I was pretty blasé about in September that I'm now a little more worried about. But I think looking on the pitch, there's not a single thing to complain about. And it's, that tactical flexibility and how he can look at players and look at the game and kind of see, you get the sense that's part of why he's able to get a lot out of some of the different players. And, one of the things I said before, you have so many players who it's like the things that they're doing regularly are really the things that make them tick.
Mm.
And it's like, I think he's a manager who can have a system and have a style of play, but also can really say, okay, what is this person really good at? How can we put them in a position to do these things really well? Keeping the game simple, but also putting people really in the right spots to thrive. I think someone like Curtis Jones, especially, is really benefiting from that this year.
Yeah, I think everyone in the midfield is really benefiting. Actually,
Great, Gravenberch too.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean everyone.
McAllister's having a phenomenal season. So Bosley is so much better this season. But then again, like you said, Gakpo, Diaz, Salah, like they're having phenomenal seasons. And then at the back, when Ebo was there, Joe has done excellently. Virgil's having a great season. Robbo's been up and down. I think Trent's had an excellent season.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's been exposed a couple of times recently, but I wonder. And I was listening to, maybe it was Under Pressure, and they were talking about Trent coming back from injury and how he hasn't been quite as um, full throttle as he was before. And they were wondering about whether maybe he's minding his hamstring. Maybe he is. I'd be curious to know, is it an instruction? We don't have Connor Bradley available. You need to mind yourself. So if that
mhm.
means you don't sprint at 100% to chase back, that's okay. We will still go and we'll win. I don't know if that's the case. and maybe it's quite a risky thing for a coach to say to a player, and maybe he's just taking it upon himself. But I do think he's having an excellent season, and I don't want to talk about his contract situation because
It's
it's
been talked about.
boring. I just find it really boring. He's either going to leave or he's going to stay, and that's what happens in football. But
Mm.
anyway, we're not going to talk about that.
You just talked about it. We won't
I
talk about
did
it
talk.
more.
We won't talk about the thing I've just talked about, Andrew.
No, we didn't
Um,
talk about it.
but look, we did get a an interesting point in the MindField Discord. And if you're not on the MindField Discord, get in there and ask us a question if you have any burning questions.
You
But
were going to say something about missing out, and then it's,
no, I
you
wasn't.
know, it's a slow drip of really insightful and interesting questions and things, but at a rate of every other week or so.
Yeah,
But
it's
we
it,
appreciate the engagement where we get it for sure.
it's a
Me
higher
not being tech
intelligence.
savvy doesn't help. Like and it's actually not because I can open that app and look at it. I'm not like designed for any sort of regular communication, like text messaging, WhatsApp. I left. That was probably why our episode didn't happen a few weeks ago. I got a new phone and I didn't realize I had to turn WhatsApp back on. So I just anyway, please post in the Discord. We'll check it. We'll get back to you. Super interesting question that we got for this week.
Yeah, so Ramiz mentioned that he or she, sorry, saw this clip about Salah playing chess with a fan. Wondering if Salah playing chess and having to think moves ahead has helped with his football. Would be interesting to see if someone asks him one day. And I found that a really interesting question, and it brought up for me. Um, I suppose, do you ever look at kid sports, or when you were a kid, was there always those kids who were just really good at every sport, or not really good necessarily, but they could do most sports that they put
Mm.
their hand to? And I've always maintained it's really important for kids to have different sports that work different elements of their brain, work different elements of the body, because that really helps them improve their dexterity, but also their brains improve as well, because they're using different parts of the brain. Do you think that highlights something in Mo Salah, and that can have a direct correlation to his ability to deal with adversity and challenges and changing situations on a pitch in a very quick way?
So is that a little bit of a nature nurture question? Like, is it that playing chess has helped him develop a skill set, or is there something sort of internal to Mo Salah and how he interacts with the world that is going to allow him to connect with and succeed at chess similarly, that can kind of be good in these different areas?
Oh, we can answer both, because where I was asking the question from was just like, we talk about the mental edge, like, or even, listening to Fatigue Index, and they're talking about the physical edge, like what are the things that make a difference, or injury prone players, or what makes them injury prone. And like, that is the nature of sport now. It's about trying to get that 1% edge on the opposition in every single situation. So does encouraging, say if you had a child who was showing some sort of higher level of um, athletic performance in anything, like what we can do, and what I see all the time with young people, is parents drill in, go, right, that's it, we're giving up all the other sports, and school can kind of take a back seat, and we're just going to go do. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, and I'm not saying that that doesn't work out, but I'm wondering, using that other parts of the brain, those other parts of the brain, the other sides of how we interact with the world, is that just as important? And is there a chance that can give you an edge on the pitch?
Yeah, you've made the question a lot bigger, or at the
Yeah,
very
you're
least, like
welcome.
you've given me a lot of ideas. Well, you're welcome because I'm probably about to talk a whole lot. So sorry. The real To me, the factor, the concept, whatever, at the heart of this is really transferability. And so when you're talking about a given skill or a given trait, and you're thinking about, can it make an impact from one thing to another? So like what chess is the example. Is like, can chess make you a better soccer player? The answer is absolutely, but it won't. Playing chess alone is not enough to make you a better soccer player. And so the place where I know this actually really well, and I think this is really interesting, is from the youth sport literature. And so that's actually where my thesis and dissertation work was looking at transferability of life skills in youth sport, because we have all of these young athletes. One of the things we say all the time is that participating in sport at a young age builds life skills. Um, but often we don't actually ask how, or does it definitely, or there's all sorts of negative things that you also can learn from sport. And really, what the youth sport, like the life skills in youth sport or the positive development in youth sport literature shows very clearly, is that yes, youth sport can be a great context for developing positive life skills and traits and resilience and these different things, but the transfer is not going to happen automatically,
Okay.
and that you need to be intentional about discussing, hey, you had a really tough first half, and I saw that that was a tough first half, but I saw you take a few breaths and let that go and really refocus in the second half and show some great resilience. And look how you did that. That was really great. Like, that's something you can do. And that's probably something you can do outside of here if you're having a hard time, right? Like that small sentence or that little coaching moment, just to indicate, hey, I saw that thing you did and you can do that other places, or you can do that again in sport. That's going to build resilience. Someone having a terrible first half and a good second half isn't necessarily going to build resilience in and of itself, or might over time if that person realizes themselves, oh, like I could do that again. What did I do here? Um, that idea of transferability. So then, like taking it to the chess example, what would I expect and what would I not expect? What I wouldn't expect is if you took 10 soccer players and football players and had them all play chess for a year every day, that all 10 of them, if you then asked them at the end of the year, hey, how did the chess affect your performance on the pitch, or do you feel like the chess impacted your soccer? Um, Probably if they hadn't started chess with the idea of their performance on the pitch in mind, the answer for some of them would be like, you might have two who would say, yeah, I started thinking about what am I doing here and how does that translate to the pitch? Or I was playing soccer and I was thinking, or I was playing chess and I was thinking, hey, the way this piece moves, the way this space opens up, it kind of reminds me of blank on the pitch, right? And so like you'd have the two or three players maybe who made that parallel. Um, and they started thinking about that on their own. And it's in those moments of reflection that the change is going to happen and where the transfer happens. There's this idea, hey, there's this thing I see on the pitch that's like this thing that happens over here. Isn't that interesting? And now they're looking at both, and that's where I would expect there to be some benefit. I think then you would have maybe this middle group who would probably say, oh, the chess made me more thoughtful about, what's going to happen next. Or it's like they might be kind of making up as they go along, or they would be saying things you recognize might be beneficial in chess that would also be beneficial on the pitch. But whether or not they were able to really break those down in a way where they would say, if you ask them, well, how did you use that? The first two people, they might be able to say, well, I recognized that. I don't know. I don't know chess well enough to give you a good example, but I recognize that if you have a piece all the way like out on the side, it limits your options for how that piece can move because you run into the sideline, and that's similar how the sideline is on the pitch. And so finding moments where I can cut in and open up more options, like it just made me think about that. And so I thought about that here, and like these are a couple places where I used it. Maybe they would do that extra level of processing. If you ask that second group, hey, like okay, you said it made you better at thinking ahead a few moves, how did you use that? My guess is then they would be like, uh, the concepts are there. They see how the concepts overlap, but I wouldn't expect actual transfer if you don't have that moment of someone being able to tell you, here's how I use that thing, or at least to be able to start articulating. Because sometimes we do something subconsciously, it's hard then to put words to it. Um, I want to get back to that point actually,
Okay.
because there's so much coaching that happens and so many words that are used where when you then ask the athlete to explain that further, how do you use that? The answer is uh they're not sure. And that
Mm,
shows, I think, where a lot of coaching actually ends is right there without that additional transfer. I don't know how many people of the hypothetical 10-person chess group I described just there. I think five. You'd have, I think, five others who just like wouldn't have thought about it.
mm,
If you were to then take that same group of 10 people and you were going to say, we're going to have you play chess every day. And then on the weekends, we're going to have you, like after you've played your game, we're going to have you watch your clips and think about what parts of what you're seeing in the game correspond with chess. Or how can you use chess to improve what you're seeing from yourself on the pitch? Having that question as an open question to prompt reflection would spark the kind of transfer that you're talking about, or that I
mm,
think someone's talking about, because it's then you're taking these two things and you're forcing someone to put them together. And it's that reflection over time that builds change.
mm.
Um, that's different from just regular exposure to stimulus A is going to make this change. For some people, it might because they're reflective, but it's probably that reflection piece that's going to happen anyway. Just having someone play chess a bunch is not going to create some knock on effect down the road unless they're transferring those ideas. What it might do is it creates something that can transfer. And probably a lot of us have had this experience in other places in our life. Um, there's a book that we're reading and then all of a sudden we're at work and this thing pops up which isn't necessarily related to the book but kind of is related to the book and we're like, oh, I've never thought about that in that way before. But there needs to be that moment where then you think about it in that way and you're like, huh, if I add these two things together, that's a new perspective on this thing. But otherwise, like if you have a book that you're reading but no part of that book ever, like you never connect it to your life, there's never that moment of like, oh, this fits here. It's not, just reading the book by itself doesn't create any of that transfer or change.
Yeah.
And so that's part of, excuse me, what I would say with transferability is there has to be some intentionality with that for that to stick. Some people will take that intentionality upon themselves naturally, just being reflective, or they'll have these moments. But by and large, I would expect most people not to have those moments unless they're sort of pushed to have them.
So it almost sounds, and maybe I'm simplifying what you're saying though, is the reflective piece is actually the important piece, not the playing of the chess necessarily.
Yes. That would that's what I would suggest.
Mm. Which is interesting. Like, so my daughter has done fairly okay in football, and as she went through the levels of coaching, I suppose, so the higher the coaches, the more um, paperwork she was given, but reflective paperwork. So, how did the training session? What did you do well? What could you improve on? That kind of thing. So it was quite intentional. And while she kind of found it a little bit of a chore, I think having the reflective practice was definitely beneficial for her because she was able to look and go that she was forced. That's it. She was forced to think about what did you do well. Because
Mhm.
if you think about it, like I'm sure we could sit down here with Messi and say, what do you think about when you're beating five players? And I go, nothing. It's just what I do. It's what I've always done. I just do it naturally. I don't even think about it. I don't think where I'm going to put the ball. I just do it. And I think as a society, we are becoming more reflective, which can present challenges because we can become overly analytical of ourselves, and we all have that gremlin that sits on our shoulder and will allow us to hear the critical voices creeping in that don't necessarily need to be there. But I do think, especially for young athletes, understanding how they do what they do, why they do what they do, is probably going to be beneficial for them in the long run in terms of honing their skills if they want to hone those skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, if we were chatting with Mo Salah, he might go, I just like playing chess.
He could.
But he might go, no, chess is one of those games that stimulates this part of the brain, and I want to improve this part of the brain because this is how I see it possibly helping me on the pitch, and maybe that's what he does.
And I think for him, he's also obsessed with improving as a footballer. And when you're so obsessed with something, it's almost impossible to not then be engaged with something like chess and kind of thinking about improving as a footballer. Like it makes him more likely to make that change. I think he's obsessed with improving.
Hmm.
A lot of athletes aren't or don't know how. And which I think is actually one of the biggest gaps. And it's interesting. Well, I was on my way to read the Mo Salah chess article in the Athletic. I got totally sidetracked by this, what ended up being way longer than I expected, article about scanning the pitch and how frequently people scan, and how important scanning is. One of the little quotes from there that wasn't even really about scanning that I sort of took out was, there was a comment about, I think it was the person who was writing the article or done a lot of focus on scanning, how how minimal the focus on individual development is once you get to the higher levels and older ages, and 25, 26, 27, how little focus there is on individual development at that point. um, I think it means that the people who take that really seriously have been the exception, someone like Mo Salah. um, and it's not, again, reflection is such a huge part of that. And it's really like a regular reflection on what makes me effective and
Hmm.
how do I impact the game. And this is something I do a lot when I'm working with players, because I think otherwise you're missing you're missing a component. And like what I mean by that is like, okay, so the end goal is you want to be Messi beating those five players without thinking about it. What I think we often tell people is just don't think. And it's like, that's great advice if you already innately and automatically know how to beat those five players so instinctively that the part of your brain that has that motor skill and has the perceptual skill and puts that information together and executes it can do that on its own. But like, it wouldn't matter how little I think. I can't do that. It was
Yeah.
actually really, this reminds me of a funny moment. So one of my first ever real sports psychology experiences, I was working, um, the military academy West Point had like five sports psychologists who would work with their Division 1 teams. And so I was an intern there, and I was talking about playing intramural soccer, and it was soccer because it's soccer here. But and it's like, I never played soccer in high school. Like, I played growing up when I was 4 and 5 or 6 or something like that. But then I just really enjoyed playing it. But of course, like, not very good. Like, I just didn't have the touches, the skills, whatever. And so I was talking with like my mentors, and it was Jeff Coleman, and talking to him about like how I was trying some of the skills that I was learning about at the mentor, like the internship. And like, it didn't matter like how mentally in the right spot that I got, like it just felt like a lot of this stuff wouldn't happen automatically. And he was like, "Yeah, you're bad at soccer." That's not a mental issue. You can't automatically do something that you don't know how to do. And I think that becomes the thing is there's a piece in there of, okay, what's really happening when Messi's beating those five guys? There are tiny pieces of information that he's processing about where they're standing, how their weight is distributed, where he needs to move them, where he needs to move himself, how he can move himself there. Yeah, that happens automatically for him because he's done it so many times. Some of that learning does happen implicitly. Like, you don't need to be doing a worksheet every day to be like, if this, then this, if this, then this. Some of that learning happens in like explicitly too, probably where maybe he's a coach is telling him, hey, try this or look for this thing. Um, but yeah, some of it's going to happen implicitly, but a lot of it's not.
Mm.
Um, I think, and this was the point I wanted to circle back to. The the sense I get about how a lot of training is set up is that it doesn't align neatly with the gold standard for improving, which is deliberate practice. So there's a guy, Anders Ericsson, has put a ton of effort into this idea of deliberate practice and what does it take. And I don't remember, there's four big components, maybe five, maybe more. I think when I talk to athletes about it, I usually focus on four of those components. So I don't know how many there are in reality at this point.
Mm.
Um, but the four that I usually talk about is first having a model or a goal. And so it's like, okay, what is it that I want this to look like in the end? What do I want the outcome to look like? Then being able to step back and break that down into the steps you need to get there. So if what you want the end product to look like is to be beating those five guys without really thinking about it. Okay, well, what do you need to be able to do first? Well, beat one person. Okay, what do you need to do to be able to beat one person? Break that down further. It's like, okay, I need to get them off balance or I need to create space in a certain way. Okay, how do you do that? Break that down further. And so you need to know implicitly or explicitly, like, how is someone going to react to my moving the ball a certain way? Like, what do I do when they do this? Like, what am I looking for? What's the cue? And this is what I usually try to work with people on is probably in beating a person. And this is something in no sport ever have I been tricky enough to like do a move against somebody. Maybe lacrosse, but that was like a power thing. I just would run.
Ran through them.
That was basically, I'm like a little shorter than 6'2" and was big for a high schooler, and so just fucking run, man. Like, um, so what's the cue to let you know what your next move is? And then can you prime yourself to recognize and attack that moment when it arises? And that's Messi is going to have that. And so first you would need to be able to do that with one person, then two, probably in the idea of I beat this first person, the second one, there's some information you're processing on both. Um, bringing this back to the idea of transferability, that deliberate practice is about transferability and making something transferable.
Mm.
In ice hockey right now, there's a huge push towards skills coaching. And so individual development has become a bigger thing. There's a big push towards skills coaching. I suspect that some skills coaches are very good at that integration step of going from here's the skill, but here's what it needs to look like in game, and some aren't. And so, but like it doesn't matter how many times you practice this one explicit skill, it's how well can you integrate that and how well can you bring those things across. And that becomes true whether it's chess, whether it's they talk about this virtual reality and scanning stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think the virtual reality stuff lends itself nicely because the context is so similar. But I think you still need to be explicit about what are we trying to learn. And so the one I read today is really what they're scoring is they're scoring how well you scan and how frequently you scan, and something is your scanning symmetry appropriate. And apparently Liverpool have the scanning wonder kid in their academy. He's like 13 or 14. Fucking no one scans like this kid scans,
Really?
apparently. And he talks about scanning. he's the wunderkind of scanning. I can't remember his name, but I'll put it in the
Excellent.
Discord chat, the scanning wunderkind. I'm super interested to see what he turns into,
Mm,
because I think he's probably had more deliberate practice around scanning than maybe anyone, and
mm,
real tools to emphasize the deliberate practice of scanning. But anyway, like, there's a whole score system within that game, which then creates some implicit learning. What you're trying to do is get that score, but to get that score you have to be doing these things in certain ways. That's a really good way to get that on an implicit level. You don't necessarily, but it's because someone already put in the explicit thought to create the structure to make that learning implicit.
yeah.
If that makes sense. I think
It does
I'm
make
in the weeds a little bit here,
No,
Alan.
but
I
it does
know
make
that.
sense. And I think some of the arguments I've heard is that, well, does that take away individuality and and stuff like that? And I don't think it does. It's like, you know, learning to paint, like the Impressionists. Doesn't mean you have to paint like the Impressionists forever. You can go and just use that as your foundation to build those skills and then find your nuances and your niches in how you want to do it. It's the exact same in sport. So it is about giving yourself a technical skill base that is sufficient to be able to execute the the different requirements that you're going to need on the pitch. But once you have those automatic and not having to think about them, then you can start to build on it. So, if Messi beats two players, he's probably going to be able to beat three. He's probably going to be able to beat four. But for a lot of kids out there, what happens is they don't have that reflective practice. They just do it.
And I think that's where some of this comes up. And this is where I would see it. Is someone reads an article saying, "Oh, Mo Salah plays chess and that helps him on the pitch." Some parent will say to their kid, we're going to start playing chess because Mo Salah does it." And the parent is going to have no idea why it matters, no idea why it's supposed to help, and they're just going to make their kid play chess. And you know what? Like, of all things, that is not a big deal, right? But like,
Could be
the
worse.
idea is, oh, this guy does it, so it must be good. And I think you think they're like, oh, we're gonna have all these chess playing, virtual reality scanning players. They're all gonna be the same, and the reality is no, it's not, because one, only some of them are gonna use that in a way that makes it transfer anyway. And the other thing is, the individuality shines through in other places.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is, like, if you give two people the same scanning skill and all the same information, but part of what you're teaching them is how to process this in a way that resonates with them and their skill set. Part of how they approach their sport as a person is going to make a huge difference in how they develop as a player. And there's just certain things. And this is something I try to work on a lot with the athletes I work with, is like, at some level sport is expressive. Who you are as a person should manifest in how you're playing and making a difference on the field or in your sport. And your game should reflect something about you, something unique about you. And like, I really believe this is, players, when they're at their absolute best, there's something about their game that reflects who they are as a person. And so, like, building your game around some of those things that you do automatically. Normally it's the thing, like, what I kind of look for is, like, what is the trait that really is great for you when you're using it well, but like also gets you into trouble sometimes. And usually when you've found something that's like your greatest strength and biggest weakness, that's where you're going to run into that thing that's like very uniquely that person, or like a real trait of that person. It's part of how they see the world and interact with the world. And if it's enthusiasm, if it's competitiveness, if it's being thoughtful or getting in the weeds about things, if it's that's mine, by the way, I think.
Really?
Can you find those times other people won't be able to copy you? Um, and not that, that doesn't really matter. Like, you're just going to be able to be effective in a different way. And so, yeah, you have to keep that individuality in it. Otherwise, I think it does get boring. And
Mm.
ultimately, like, it doesn't matter how much chess you play. If you don't translate that to what does it mean to for yourself, then and like how does that translate for you in particular, then you're not really going to make that difference. So I feel like we've been all over the shop here with this, and I don't even think I answered most of your original question. Did I
That's
answer
okay.
Ramiz's question?
I think you did.
Okay.
I think you did. But I think getting into the weeds about it is where the interest lies, and hopefully that might spark something in some of our listeners to maybe bring new questions or follow-on questions or add-on questions from there that will then form another discussion for us further down the line. And I think what I liked about Rami's question is that it challenged you to go and think about this to then bring back, which brings us in a different direction. And this is where your ability to get that information across is really, really powerful. So I think it's been I think it's been an interesting podcast. So I'm happy enough with that.
I'll take
Listeners,
that too.
we are delighted to be back. First show of the new year. And yeah, we'll be back pounding your ears full of useful information in inverted commas
It's a
very
weird
soon.
catchphrase, but there here we are.
Okay, I'm still on the Christmas high, but Andrew, thanks a million for that. Ramiz, thanks for your question in the Discord, and listeners, happy New Year, and here's
Don't
to
forget, if you're interested in the hamster pod, let us know. We'll start
don't
thinking of some time soon.
don't let us know. Here's to LFC winning the two big ones this year. Arnie Slots boys. Andrew, we'll talk to you very soon. Everyone else, take care of yourselves. Goodbye. Well done.
Hey, thank you.
You did well.
But I felt like I didn't get to say what I really wanted to. I missed my like I got myself all tangled